Hey, Chris.
Hey, Kayla.
Question for you.
Yes?
What do you think happens when you Google, is Starbucks a cult?
Are we not doing any banter at all? Because we just got feedback from a fan.
What was the feedback from a fan? If you want to do banter, you can do it
fan
here,
said
but I already introduced the topic.
This particular fan said that he only cares about the banter and he doesn't care about the content at all. It's just the banter.
So we're tailoring our show to one
individual
single
fan.
listener?
Yes, we're good that way. We take everybody's input seriously.
What do you want to talk about?
I don't have anything. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about what happens when you Google, is Starbucks a
Oh,
cult?
that's a good idea. Yeah. I have to imagine that there's there's a lot of Starbucks hate. You know, some of it legitimate, some of it more like, oh, there's a Starbucks in every corner. And some of it because they, union bust and all that. Plus, I don't know, anytime something is like that ubiquitous of a thing in your culture, I feel like
people are going to call it a cult. They're at least
I don't know. Where are we going with
it.
this? Yeah, they're going to criticize it for sure.
We're not going anywhere yet. I just literally, what do you think happens when you Google this? Well, I can tell you what happens. You get interesting returns, honestly, going back to the 90s. People have been answering this question or positing this question since the 90s. Yeah, you get returns like, Starbucks is a cult from r/Starbucks baristas. How Howard Schultz created a personality cult at Starbucks.
Oh, that makes sense.
From Politico. Barista, beware. Starbucks is a cult from Glassdoor. Starbucks is a cult from letsrun.com. Is Starbucks a cult from the Daily Caller? Starbucks is a cult that pays $9 an hour from Tech Insider, and more.
I wouldn't cite the Daily Caller.
I just wanted to show that I'm not citing any of these as...
You wanted to see as both sides thought.
I'm not citing any of these as evidence. I'm simply citing that people have asked this question from all spheres of life for a long time.
I see. Okay, but here's the thing, though. We have this criteria. Is it niche?
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks is the least niche thing I can possibly think of. Aside from maybe McDonald's.
Yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous. It's pretty mainstream culture.
That kind of puts a bullet in the whole thing right there, doesn't it?
It just makes it a religion.
Oh, right.
It just makes it a religion, which
right.
We will get to that. So there's a lot of thought already given to this space of whether or not Starbucks is a cult. But
clearly,
I wanted to talk about Starbucks on the show.
What prompted you? We don't even go to Starbucks.
Excuse you, we go to Starbucks fairly often.
Well, sometimes when we want a milkshake.
My niece goes to Starbucks every Wednesday and gets herself a little cake pop. I mean, she doesn't get it herself. She's 3. But she gets a little cake pop.
She just walks right in.
She just walks in.
Says one cake
drives
pop, please.
Up. I don't know. It's just, it's ubiquitous. Like we said, it's a corporate powerhouse. It's a cultural touchstone. It's been in the news a lot throughout the years.
It definitely fits into your corporate culture episode.
Yeah. And I've always figured that there's more to the story under the surface, in any big company. There's something, that IBM songbook just made me go, oh, okay, companies are fucking weird.
There's a whole venti full of stuff.
Get out of here.
Under the surface.
Before I settled on this as a topic, I thought to myself, okay, if you and I are going to talk about Starbucks on Culture is Weird, what do I have to add to the conversation? People are already talking about whether or not it's a cult. What more can be said about the cult connections that hasn't been explored by all sides, Daily Caller and Politico alike? Well,
I don't know.
A little while back,
you actually have something new to add to the
I think so.
Starbucks conversation? Starbucks?
I think we do.
Dope.
A little while back, we did a poll on our Patreon asking our listeners what kinds of topics they'd like us to explore this season. This, slightly lighter, helper-focused, can we build some positivity in season? And a majority of people who answered were eager to hear about workers' rights movements. That was actually the one that had the most oh, yes, I want to hear about this.
Interesting.
And wouldn't you know it, Starbucks stores across the country are currently in the process of unionizing in a highly publicized way. As you mentioned up top, yes, Starbucks has engaged in a lot of union busting. It's at the forefront right now.
Mm-hmm.
And unions are one of the cornerstones of workers' rights and labor rights movements. And unions are kind of re-entering the mainstream conversation these days because it's not just Starbucks, it's also like Amazon in the news, Apple stores, Trader Joe's, and many other kind of big name places.
The wokest of corporations busting the shit out of unions. Get shit on, you jerks, bad people.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Kayla.
Got another question for you.
Okay.
Guess what happens when you Google, are unions cults?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Like the location of Jimmy Hoffa's corpse? I don't know.
Yeah, you get some similar returns. You get, I worked at a labor union. My bosses ran it like a cult from Mother Jones.
Ooh.
You get, do unions sometimes behave like cults from In These Times? Anyone ever feel like the IBEW, which is a trade union, seems like a cult in some aspects? From Reddit. And from Cora, are trade unions like hippie cults?
I mean, like any other organization, I imagine there's, you can be prone to some of the cult-like things that other organizations we've explored on the show have themselves been prone to.
So that's why I think that this is a perfect topic for us. There is a lot to untangle, a lot to uncover, a lot of questions about cults and Starbucks and unions. And I thought the best way for us to get the full story on the effort to unionize Starbucks stores by Starbucks Workers United would be to talk to the people with their actual boots on the ground.
Well, like Starbucks union people, we're going to talk to them?
Today we have an interview with Josie Serrano and Tyler Keeling, two Starbucks workers who have been at the forefront of the Starbucks unionizing efforts here in Los Angeles.
Oh my God, they wanted to talk to us?
Yeah.
That's so cool. It's funny because by now we've had 5 or 6 people like that, but each time I'm like, whoa, really? You want to talk to us?
Yeah, same. I mean, I wasn't just, I can't lie, I wasn't just excited to talk to them because the Starbucks Workers United and the Starbucks unionizing effort is so dope, but also, and particularly these two folks we talked to because they've been undertaking crucial work in unionizing their workplaces, but also I think we've been to both of their stores for coffee.
No, really? Were they in Inglewood or something?
One of them is in Lakewood, where you and I, close to where you and I used to live when we lived down there. Remember when we used to go to that mall?
Oh, yeah.
That one was over by the mall. And then the other one is more downtown Long Beach that I'm pretty sure we've been to.
Okay. We should probably say that all of these are past places we've lived.
We do not live there currently.
Just in case we get super doxxed or something.
So not only were our listeners eager to hear what Josie and Tyler have to say, I was also very eager to have this conversation. So let's jump in and learn more about Starbucks Workers United, the circumstances that brought about this major shift in the fight for labor rights across the country, and whether or not Starbucks is actually a cult. And don't worry, we definitely get into that question.
I'm super stoked.
This is Kayla.
And this is Chris.
And this is Cult or Just Weird. The two of you introduce yourselves, and so we like to ask for names, pronouns, and just whatever you'd like to share of your background or work history or what you like to do on the weekends.
Hi, my name is Josie Serrano. I'm an organizer from a Starbucks in Long Beach, California. I use they, them pronouns. My store is the Redondo and 7th location. Along with Tyler's store, we were the first 2 stores to unionize in Southern California. I've been working at Starbucks for about 4-ish years, a little over 4 years. It's always been my side job while I've done design and film work on the side. So this has been a job that I've had in between 20 hours and full-time 40 hours for the last few years.
My name's Tyler Keeling. I've been at Starbucks for 6 years. And this is actually the job I've done for the majority of my adult life. I started here because the company had a really strong reputation for being a company where, gay people would work. And I come from a really small conservative desert town in the middle of nowhere, California. And I was really scared about getting into the workforce because of where I came from. And so Starbucks felt almost like a safe haven of a job for me. That coupled with it having the reputation for having good benefits and just being a good place to work overall. It felt like the only option I had if I wanted to go into the workforce as a young gay person supporting myself, needing some sort of stable job that I could be safe at. So I've been at the company since I was 19, 20 years old, since 2016.
I'm going to go off of my own questions already because you brought up a really good point. I think that Starbucks having this reputation for a long time of being a great place to work for, in terms of what the healthcare will cover, what education stuff will get covered, just the environment, for queer people, for gay people, for trans people, being better than other places. Can you talk a little bit about that shift of like the popular narrative used to be, maybe it still is, used to be Starbucks is like the place to work. And now in this process of unionizing, it's become, especially in leftist circles, like we're looking at it as a very hostile place to work in some ways.
Yeah. I think me and Josie can both offer like varying and various different perspectives on this front because of kind of like who we are and or like what the company has, presented itself as to us. Like for me, like I said, I went to this company, as a young gay boy trying to find some form of stability in my life. And it's interesting because like they do hail themselves as this like extremely progressive company and a company that you want to work at if you are, gay or young or, what have ye, about being, very youthful and outcasted in like regular jobs. And one thing that struck me as really, really interesting is that like almost from the jump, it felt very much like I was being asked to conform to a certain standard. And like, I felt that from the first time I went there. Like I come from, like I said, a very small desert town. It's a very unique culture there. The way people act there is very unique, as compared to, like a bigger city. And when I got hired on in Olympia, Washington, which is, known for, its history and music and punk and riot grrrl and etc. But when I got hired on up there, I felt like I was being asked to like tame who I was and calm myself down and fit into kind of like a box in a lot of ways, which in a lot of ways also meant kind of like erasing my identity as a gay person. And it only got worse as my time with the company went on because I would experience workplace homophobia and it would kind of just be like the blame would be shifted onto me. I've even recently, as like late last year, I had an incident with a coworker where this coworker said something really homophobic to me. And when I spoke to my manager basically was like, well, what did you do to provoke this from being brought up? And I was just kind of like dumbfounded by that. And like, it's interesting because, this company does have that want to be seen as like a gay friendly workplace. But then my experience coupled with even stuff Josie can talk about in their experience, two vastly different experiences that go completely against what Starbucks is trying to present themselves as.
Yeah, like when I started at Starbucks, it was always meant to be temporary. I had been working in the film industry as a production designer and like working in the art departments. And I realized that that wasn't the best environment for me to be in. Like Hollywood and like, Los Angeles and the film industry out there is outwardly so, like liberal, progressive, whatever. But behind the scenes, I have encountered like so much, transphobia, homophobia, everything. And this was around the time that I had come out to myself as a trans person. And so Starbucks was always one of those jobs that was, branded as this like really nice place to work no matter who you were. And it was somebody like they always had a lot of advertising that was expressing like their gratitude for, the diversity of everybody. And so, like right when I started working at Starbucks is when they announced as a company that their health insurance would start to cover trans procedures, trans healthcare, all kinds of stuff like that. And at the time, that was so novel. Like even today, like so many companies don't offer that on like their own abode. Like so much of that is like either governed by the state or a company just doesn't want to offer that. So I was like, well, this is somewhere that I can stay for a little while and maybe like, figure myself out in the process. And what I had learned through that whole experience is that not only is the whole like package of trans healthcare and benefits through Starbucks extremely hard to navigate and is really honestly very inaccessible to most of us due to how much money we have to put into it even just to access it or how many hours we have to work a week to access it. But the culture within Starbucks management is very susceptible to store managers and supervisors that don't feel the need to uphold the branding that Starbucks has. And by that, I mean, like, there have been, just like Tyler said, there's been a lot of encounters that I've had with supervisors and store managers that have been homophobic, transphobic, have been racist to a lot of our coworkers. And Starbucks claims that they have a lot of systems and avenues to go down to report that, but it just is something that is never followed up on. I do like to mention that there is a story where, like, there is a shift that I worked where I had only just come out. Like, I was experimenting with, like, how I was, like, looking in the workplace. And all of my coworkers knew that this was, like, you know, something that was kind of, like, anxiety inducing for me, at least the coworkers that knew me well. And there was a customer that literally came up to the register, looked at me before ordering and started laughing and was like, oh, like, who do you think you're supposed to be? And I didn't really know what to think of it. This was the first time I ever experienced any kind of transphobia. And I took their order and they walked away laughing and made a comment to one of the partners, one of the workers that was behind the bar making their drink. And then as they left, literally said, I'm going to come back to work later. I'm going to beat you the fuck up. Like, literally, like, plain words like that, like, as they were laughing. And I was, like, in total shock over it. My coworkers, like, the other baristas that were working there were in total shock too. And my supervisor had just watched and did not interject in all of this. Did not come up to me to ask me how I was afterwards. None of that. All of the baristas, including myself, we called our equivalent of HR partner resources to report this. And the next meeting that I had when I'd come in for my next shift was with my store manager. And my store manager essentially disciplined me for saying that I should have been the one to speak up about it. I should have been the one to end that conversation with the customer. I should have said something to the supervisor. And it said that it was my fault that, like, nothing had gotten done in it, even though my supervisor was witnessing it. And what's happening is, like, we're hearing stories like that all across the country. Like, it's not an isolated incident. And that supervisor did not get disciplined for that. That store manager never got disciplined. That store manager is actually en route to become a district manager in the district they're working in now. So we're seeing all of this around the country. And so it makes me extremely frustrated with how this company is branded as, like, this, like, safe haven for so many of us.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you mentioned, I mean, first of all, these are terrible experiences. Just nobody should be experiencing this ever in life. And then especially not in their workplaces, particularly when the workplace, like you've both mentioned, likes to portray itself as, you know, progressive safe haven and is not actually creating that environment. And it's just it's so disappointing to hear about these experiences happening in an area like Long Beach. I used to live in Long Beach for a long time. A lot of folks, you know, think of Long Beach as a safe haven for queer community. And so for the stores to not even be able to protect its workers in that environment, and it's happening elsewhere in the country, like, clearly this is something that's endemic to the stores itself.
I would even venture to say, like, systematic within the company too.
That is very disappointing to hear. I'm having a hard time articulating myself with a question for this, just because it's really hard to hear that. And I feel like it's such an encapsulation of so much we'll see of, you know, progressivism, where it has the image of one thing and then just atrocity right underneath.
Right.
My biggest question for both of you in this whole discussion is just, how did you know it was time to start unionizing your workplace? Was it incidents like these? Were these incidents just kind of like straw that broke the camel's back, or part of a larger whole? Like, how did you know it was time as you've had these experiences stack?
I know in my experience, like, again, coming from kind of, like, really deep poverty, and just to kind of, like, paint the image of what that poverty looks like throughout my childhood, we faced homelessness on a regular basis. And my mom was in and out of addiction, and we were in and out of living situations within 6 months at a time. And we never had any true form of stability. And that goes straight through my mom dying and, like, me needing to get out of this, like, dead-end desert town. And I left, right? I left when I was 18. And it was very clear what poverty meant to me, because it was my lived experience. And that was an experience that, like, so few people I knew shared onto to the degree that, like, I had experienced it. Like, even up until, like, recent times in my life, like, I'll talk to people and they'll talk about, like, their childhoods, and they'll say something and I'm like, huh, like, that's so weird. But, like, it's not weird. My experience is just, like, with poverty is so different than what most people had. And so kind of, like, seeing that we don't say that we have caste systems in place, you know, in the United States or in capitalism. But to me, it's very clear that, upward mobility through class systems isn't real. And, people are trapped in jobs, whether or not they like them. They don't have a lot of choice as to whether they can get to a better job or get to a better paying job, especially if they're living paycheck to paycheck and don't have any sort of financial support to get from, bad job to better job, right? And Starbucks is one of those jobs. It's one of those jobs where, it prides itself on being so good to its workers. But in my store, we have workers that live in Compton. We have workers from Long Beach. We have workers from, all over areas of Southern California. We have workers that come from LA, because it's they feel safer working at our store than they do working in LA, but they work in really impoverished areas and underserved areas of LA. And it was very clear to me throughout my time with this company over, the 4 stores in 3 states that I've worked at, that we have no protections. We have no recourse. There is nothing that this job can provide to us to make it a stable job, even though they want people to be at this job long term. Starbucks prides itself on having people be invested in the company in the long term and want to be here. And they have a big focus on, longevity within the company, retiring through the company, promoting within the company, and etc. Right? But they don't give the tools for that, and they don't create an environment for that. And that was a big driving force for me as someone who is very passionate about protecting workers and people in poverty from what is basically just being abandoned by society. But the ultimate thing for me was seeing that unionization was possible with the Buffalo stores. I was talking to Casey from Buffalo 2 or 3 days ago over Zoom, and we were just kind of reminiscing because she found my initial intake email that I sent to the Starbucks Workers United email, and she's like, look what I found, and forwarded it back to me. And we just had kind of a moment where I was talking about how much it meant to me to see those workers in the Buffalo stores celebrate their victory. I had ripped that video off of Twitter of them jumping up and down and celebrating, and watched it probably 1 million times. I've watched that video and cried to that video more times than I can probably count at this point. And seeing those workers overcome everything that was thrown at them and overcome management's presence and union busting and threats and harassment, everything that was thrown at them, and still fight and win a union victory because they knew that that would be better for the workers there. I something just clicked in my brain where it was you know what, this is exactly what I care about. This is what I'm passionate about in life. And I'm very passionate about my community and my coworkers. They're a big part of my life. And that was the moment for me where it was always brewing there for me. But when the roadmap was laid out, I ran on that map as fast as I could.
Yeah, absolutely. This was something that I don't think any of us at Starbucks had ever thought about, seriously. I know that even from the moment that I started with the company, so many workers were frustrated with hours or how hard the benefits were to obtain or how the workload was always increasing. And this was just something that was just kind of part of the culture, was just being mad at Starbucks. I mean, you can even look at the numbers. The turnover rate of Starbucks has only increased over time, exponentially, though, in the last couple of years. I think that when we saw Buffalo do what they did and start unionizing, we were just, all eyes were on it. The store that I'm at now, the one that we ended up unionizing, I had just started working at that store a couple months before the union effort started in New York. And the shift that I used to work on used to always have the same 3 partners. And every day we'd come in and be like, oh, did you see the updates from Buffalo today? Did you see what's going on? And we were following it. And the day that they won that first store in Buffalo, we all clocked onto our shifts together and said, okay, we're California. We are this incredibly populated state, but also dense with Starbucks. Is how do we start this? And so we got together and okay, we can seriously do this. We just got to figure out, we just got to do a research. We got to figure out how we talk to everybody. We got to figure out if everybody is down to do this. And we found that that was not as hard as we thought it would be. Everybody was already thinking of if there is a way to change the company, if there's a way to do it, let's do it. Nobody was that nervous about it. Everybody just wanted to go forward with it. So this is something that I really do feel we had kind of brewing inside us for a really, really long time.
Like Josie said, the turnover rate at the company, it's very indicative of the state of the company. During the pandemic, I used to be able to have access to the management dashboard that only assistant store managers and store managers are supposed to have. My store manager used to go over kind of like all the metrics for every week with me. That way I kind of like knew the business and what was happening. And I remember like seeing the turnover rate for the company just go up and up and up every week. And I remember feeling that in our store when during the pandemic, labor conditions in our store had declined so bad. Everyone in my store was an 8-hour long panic attack every day, 5 days a week when I worked there, 7 days a week, for everyone else throughout the week. And it just like, I remember a point where all of my friends, we all worked the same shift together every week because we had something called block scheduling where we were all working the same schedules during the same day parts. And I was in a day part with all of my closest friends. And everyone snapped one week. We had just had, 2 months of bad shifts followed by a week of the worst shifts I've ever worked in my life. And there was this resolve to quit. Everyone wanted to quit. And all of my best friends did quit. And I demoted myself to focus on school because I knew I needed to get out of this company. But I had no recourse for getting out of this company. And that was about 6 months before everything with Buffalo really started kicking off in the public eye. Like Josie said, that day Buffalo won, my store, all of us that were working in the mornings went out to breakfast to talk about that exact thing. And it's funny because one of the people that was at that breakfast is actually the person who got me and Josie in touch back in February when we really started taking organizing in a very serious and aggressive direction in our stores to make it happen.
Yeah, I was kind of going to ask, since you're both at different stores, how did your paths cross? Are the folks that work at these various SoCal locations, does everybody know each other? Is everybody getting introduced to each other? How is that kind of cooperation unfolding?
I guess as far as how it started was our store, my store, the Long Beach store, we had gotten together and we were essentially already starting to organize back in January and February. We were inviting all of our coworkers out to lunches after shifts, and we were just kind of bringing up the idea hey, how do we all feel about what's going on in Buffalo and what's happening in Arizona and other places at that point. And nobody really knew what was going on, but they were interested. And so when we started talking about it, we started realizing that everybody had the same problems at the company. And from then on, it was just kind of connecting point A to point B, which point A was how do we fix these problems at the company? And point B was unionizing. It was just getting that together. And in the process of all of this, one of my first coworkers, when I first started working at the company, he had been working at Tyler's store, and he had been talking to Tyler about organizing their store, and through that connected both of us together. If it hasn't been mentioned already, Lakewood is extremely close to Long Beach. It's almost like another neighborhood of Long Beach. So proximity-wise, we were super, super close to each other, and we're able to kind of have partners from the Lakewood store and partners from the Long Beach store get together and start talking about organizing before we were even public with anything yet. And that kind of led us all to realize how big of a picture this was, it wasn't just our store kind of doing some big rebellious thing or anything. This is another store so close to us that was having all of the same conversations, had all of the same problems as us. And since then, it's definitely, as the movement grows in California, and as we have so many more stores here and across the country too, there's been a lot of avenues for stores to communicate with each other now as well. I think that's partly what's been so successful about this campaign is that there are so many stores that have undergone this and are going through it and are thinking about it, that it isn't that hard to find other partners and other stores, kind of how Tyler and I found each other now, and they can talk about it and see that this isn't just a wild concept anymore. This is something that everybody is thinking about.
As you're having these conversations, what are the big bullet points of these are the things that every store or the partners at the stores want to change? What are the biggest problems that come from working at a Starbucks?
Oh man, that's a big question.
Yeah. How many hours do you have?
Yeah. So kind of the big key points that I hit in my store when I was talking to my coworkers was the general frustrations that we had felt, especially seeing how much of our workforce was new and undertrained, especially at this time, right? 6 months ago when we first started organizing. And it was hard because everyone had different problems in my store with the company, especially older partners who had been at my store or been with the company long enough to remember what it was like when the company was a bit better versus people who were new, who didn't know anything different with the company, right? And like some really big problems that we were having in my store was, you know, around schedules, around consistent scheduling, around not being scheduled enough to, you know, pay our rent and survive, or be like scheduled enough to qualify for benefits. And then the other really big thing was the pay rate. In my store, our store is a fairly successful drive-through. I would say in the ballpark during our slow times, we're making it anywhere from, you know, $55,000 to $65,000 a week. But nobody in my store makes that, let alone a third of that. And there's no reason that we can't, you know, be making more when we're producing this much money for the company. But then what really kicked it off and everyone found really frustrating was at the beginning of the year, our then CEO, Kevin Johnson, took like a multi-million-dollar pay raise, which is more than any of us have made in our tenure at the company, right? And he just gets that on top of whatever he was already making, whatever insane number he was already making. And the company had also hit record profits. They had netted about $5 billion with $30 billion in assets that they just had. And store managers had also just been getting these like insane huge bonuses for working throughout the pandemic, whereas we were given nothing for working throughout the pandemic. I remember like I had a store manager tell me what the bonus was for their store, and it was mind-boggling because it was more than I made in like 4 or 5 months, and they just got that every fiscal quarter. And it was really hard to swallow that when I couldn't pay my rent and bills on time, where I was having to ask family that I had for a little bit of money to help pay my electricity bill, or, you know, afford groceries, or, you know, God forbid, like, you know, there was a point where I had to get new tires on my partner's car, and that was like $450, and we didn't have the money for that. And it was like, okay, well, now I have to, you know, pray to God I can pick up extra shifts and also ask family for money and stuff like that to survive. Meanwhile, my store manager on a cup launch day would buy $300 in new cups. And then also, like, she got in a car crash and got a brand new car, and she just, you know, paid it off in full right up front, so she didn't have to have a car payment. And she just moved into like a new apartment, and like she was living completely comfortably as she needed to. And like the disparity between me, who is paid more than other baristas in my store because of my tenure, maybe it's only a little bit, but it's still, you know, more, not being able to afford anything while my store manager could, while our store was so successful, and everyone else in my store was faring off, you know, equally bad or worse than I was. It just was about getting people to see that and be aware of their conditions and be aware that like the company had the resources to treat us better. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. They just needed to see that and understand like that we can fight for better conditions and better pay and reclaim some of our, like, the profits for the workers, not just us, but for all workers.
And I think what's really interesting too is that for a lot of stores, they are unionizing because of their treatment with like their supervisors, the store managers, all of that. But at the store that I'm at now, I can say with confidence that most of us really like our store manager. He actually was a barista that worked himself up the ladder to become a store manager. And he's like, you know, for the most part, he has done a pretty good job of showing his appreciation for us. And he knows how hard the job is, how physically demanding the job is, how emotionally demanding the job is. And when we were getting together to talk about unionizing, there was the question in our store, like, yeah, but like we have a good boss. Like, why would we want to do that to him? But as we talked more about it, I think our store, we were positioned right out the gate in that this was not something that we were doing to spite our store manager or even in response to our store manager. This was to attack all of these systemic problems in this company, this like culture of the company that lets certain store managers and other stores get away with things that they shouldn't, or, you know, like maybe even not give the support they need to store managers to support the baristas in the store. And a lot of the unionizing stores, like when they go public with it, they write a letter to our CEO talking about why that store is unionizing, like what they want to see more of, and then they like sign it as a store. And when we wrote ours, we made extra like special care to put in there that we like our store manager. This is not against our store manager. We are doing this to fight a company that is not fair to anybody working at the bottom, anybody working in the stores even. And that's kind of like been something that has been, that's made me very inspired by this whole movement, right? It's like we're all kind of getting this class consciousness at the same time. Like you're seeing, we have people in our store that are 17 years old. And you know, I'm 28. I'm a lot older than a lot of like the partners that are coming into the workforce right now. But like we're seeing a lot of them already come in tired of how they're being treated just like after a few weeks on the job. And they understand that what they're making on the job is not enough to have, you know, a sustainable life. So throughout this whole movement, it's just been it's been incredible. Like we're seeing so many people want to take back what should be theirs in their labor and like just fight for having like a comfortable life, not just for them, but for the people that follow them as well.
I like that you point out that, you know, you made a point of saying this is not against our specific supervisor and, you know, the supervisor's great. But, you know, other supervisors are not. To point that out is so important because it's probably really easy for folks on the outside or for corporate to go, oh, your supervisor's crappy. Okay, bad apple. That's a bad apple. That's a bad apple. These are individual issues versus addressing the fact that like, no, we are unionizing because this is a systemic issue within the corporate system, within the corporate, with the system that you have created. These issues abound. And it's not just because some guy is, you know, I've been to that Lakewood location and yeah, that is prime real estate. Like that is making bank over there. But yeah, it's not just down to one crappy manager, one crappy supervisor.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that like, you know, we've had to undergo what we're calling like these like captive meetings. Essentially like, you know, when the unionizing process starts, they'll have like a district, like what's likely to happen is your district manager and store manager will sit down different partners at different times and talk to them about why they shouldn't unionize and give them like facts about unionizing. And a lot of it is extremely misleading. There's been unfair labor practices charged with the federal government over some of the accusations that have been made at these meetings. And one thing that I noticed that was really interesting was that our district manager was kind of trying to position that conversation to be like, yeah, your store manager isn't so bad. Like he has it really hard. And he was trying to pit us against him, knowing that he was a really good store manager. And like, there could be people in the store that would fall for seeing the union movement as us against him and not us against Starbucks, the company, the corporate like offices, the corporate people that are making these decisions. And so like, that was something that I think she was shocked to see that we were always combating when she was bringing that up. We were always like, no, this is not against them. This is not against our store manager. This is against the people that are not paying us a living wage, that are treating us badly from the top.
And one thing I kind of wanted to add on that too, like you mentioned, like it isn't necessarily a problem with the store manager. And there are definitely store managers who contribute to the problem or, you know, continuously reinforce problems people are having within the company. But like, even just to give like a really solid example, my store manager was aggressively anti-union. She was way more aggressive than most store managers that I've heard of, especially in our state. She was holding regular conversations. She was actively trying to pit people against each other. She launched 3 separate investigations against me to try to get me fired as like the union leader in my store. And she was, you know, she was super, super transparent about that. She thought, you know, we shouldn't unionize. And there are some people who were absolutely activated and turned pro-union because of her. But she has long since left the company. She left back in June. She left and we had another store manager come into our store, and we don't have like a dedicated store manager. We have what's called a proxy store manager, somebody who's overseeing our store. And this manager is incredible. And she's put so much of an effort into, you know, supporting our partners and like helping ensure like partner satisfaction in our store and making sure that like, you know, people are getting the schedules they need to survive right now. But I think, you know, her coming in really shows why unions are so important, because you see the disparity between a good store manager and, you know, maybe a less than standard store manager. But also you see like, even with a good store manager, the gaps between where we are and where we could be or what we should have is still very present, because like a good store manager can't fix all the problems within the company. These companies are systemic. They're structural within the company. They are built into the company's operational standards, right? That's not something that can just be fixed with one manager. It's something that a company needs to be held accountable for. And that's a big part of, I think, what's going on in my store right now is people are really seeing like, oh, a good store manager isn't fixing all the problems we've been having.
Yeah, it can never just be one person when it's a systemic issue like that. It makes total sense. You've both touched on this a little bit, but could you expand a little bit more on what are some of the obstacles that have been thrown at you in this process, either from individuals, from corporate, whatever you're able to talk about?
I think one of the really big problems that has been happening, and it's kind of become more of a problem now, is managers are now becoming more aware of what they are and aren't allowed to do. And they still fumble a lot even with that knowledge, and they still break the law a lot even with that knowledge. But if there's one thing they're queuing into, it's that they can, activate somebody who isn't pro-union and try to get them to be aggressive in the store manager's place. Because this person, like a shift supervisor, for example, who is part of the bargaining unit and who gets to vote, can be aggressively anti-union legally because they are one of the people who gets to vote. And so we've been seeing managers create intentional division to try to turn people against unionizing. And that's been it's been a really big problem, because managers know, if I get this person to do it, I'm in the clear, I'm safe. And they'll sometimes target somebody who they know has influence too, and try to get that person to then pull other people onto their side. And they often target, a charismatic person with influence who people like, who's a good leader in the store. If they see that leader, that person with influence is maybe on the fence and doesn't have information they need, or is against it. And yeah, that's been one of the hugest problems that I've seen cropping up lately.
Yeah, we're also seeing too that especially in these captive meetings, district and store managers will target specific things that they know will scare certain workers. So the way that a district manager or a store manager may speak to a certain partner is not the way they would speak to another one. And that's when we kind of got into this whole, a lot of these reports about how Starbucks was threatening trans healthcare. They were going up to specifically trans partners and saying, we don't know if your healthcare is going to be here if you vote yes on this union. And, if you are a young trans person that is only working at this job because this is maybe your only way to ever get the procedures that you want to get, that is terrifying to hear. And so, it's intimidating. You don't know if you're going to vote for the union if you're, a 17-year-old that doesn't know anything about unions, or how this process works. And of course, suggesting that is illegal and that they can't take anything away from you. But that is really scary to hear. We had somebody in our store who has been very vocal that they have only been the company to do ASU, which is a service that Starbucks provides to help cover tuition through online classes. And they're only with the company to be a part of that. And so during their captive meeting, the store manager and district manager were only talking about how ASU could be taken away and the legalities of they just don't know. The union could want to take that away from you. We don't know. And kind of just suggest that a lot. But a funny story is that with that specific instance, we had been talking about how a lot of these claims that they're suggesting in these captive meetings can't be physically written down because that would incriminate them, because that's against labor law. And so in that meeting, we actually had that partner actually had the courage to ask our district manager to write that claim down, that ASU was going to get taken away, that the tuition program was going to get taken away. And she chose not to. She was like, no, I don't think I'm going to write that down. And was kind of flabbergasted that she was even being asked to do that. So the partner was like, oh, okay, that's a lie then, right? And so she didn't respond to it and was like, okay, whatever, I'm going to vote yes on the union. Yeah, that's been one of the more difficult things, along with also too, we've also been seeing aggressive media campaigns against the union from Starbucks in recent days. But I also think that that's partly backfiring on them because so many people are just okay, here's another claim from Starbucks now, as they're also seeing on TikTok all of these viral videos of management actually treating their employees terribly on video.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that a bit more too, because I was thinking the exact same thing. Is Starbucks has, at first, they were scrambling really hard. They didn't know how to, keep up with us as the campaign ourselves. They didn't know how to combat what we were doing or how the media was so glued to us. And then they finally got it together and they started finally trying to take control of the narrative in the public eye. And they would try to, anything they would do in one area in the country, they would then try to blast it all over the country to try to scare people from unionizing. So anytime they would fire somebody, they would make sure that it was in the public eye, that people would see it. And then they've also just with that, spreading that out everywhere to try to scare partners into not wanting to unionize or even being against unionizing. They've also done this like internal campaign where they have created false allegations about what's going on in the Starbucks Workers United campaign to try to frame us as like dirty or wrong, to kind of like try to like plant these ideas in people's minds. And it has worked in some ways, and in a lot of other ways it hasn't worked. And to elaborate on that further, what I mean is like, very recently Starbucks filed this claim that at one of the actions in Arizona, they claimed that there was like the partners who were on strike were being like really aggressive. They were like hitting the doors and windows. They were hitting people's cars and stuff like that. And Starbucks made this claim and then made sure managers posted this information everywhere for partners to see, and would like tell partner or managers to have conversations with partners about this. So partners would like hear about it and be like, damn, that's crazy. Like, that sucks. Like, why would they do that? That's so disrespectful. And they knew that they had a certain amount of time to get this information in people's minds, whether it was true or not, before it was disproven. And so, that charge was dropped recently, but that information, like getting that information about the charge being dropped is harder to get out and be kind of like the initial planted information. And they're trying this again right now, where they're trying to claim that there's been collusion between the NLRB and Starbucks Workers United to sway votes to be yes, to like win union votes, when like in reality none of that's true, right? Like, there's not been collusion. We wish there was. Not actually, we don't wish that, but like, if somebody wanted to make our jobs and our lives a little bit easier, like, oh no,
it'd be nice if the powers
happened.
that be were like actually on all of our sides.
Yeah, exactly, but they're not, and this isn't true. But Starbucks wrote this letter claiming that it was true. They didn't file any sort of allegations. They haven't gone through any sort of legal channels with it. But what they did was they put out a letter claiming it was true, because they knew that if somebody saw that, they'd be like, whoa, like, this campaign is dirty and stained with lies. And they knew that by doing this, like, they would also gain some sort of like political power in people's minds over this. And it's not true, and it's very clear it's not true, because where's the legal charges with this? Where's the investigation being launched? It's not happening because it's not true. But they know, but by claiming these things, that it creates kind of like a bias in people's minds.
Do you think that even with the ability for, companies like Starbucks and Amazons and whatnot, the Amazons and the Starbucks of the world, to try and control these narratives and really are able to try and get these things out there, do you think the sentiment nationally is different right now than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago about unions? Like, is there a labor movement happening in the United States right now? Is that a real thing? Let's talk about it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, 100%.
Absolutely.
Undoubtedly. Something clicked in people's minds pre-pandemic, where everyone started seeing their jobs get worse, and younger people started getting this like notion that, I don't need this job, I can just quit. Especially people who had some sort of safety net, whether it was living with family or they had a little bit of money set aside and they could jump from job A to job B without a problem. But like, people stopped being loyal, which is good, because there's no reason to be loyal to a company straight up. Pensions don't exist anymore. Like, what's the point of loyalty to a company, right? But during the pandemic especially, a lot of young people entered the workforce, and they saw like, if they're not going to prioritize me or treat me well at this job, I don't need to be here. And I can even just say, like, from seeing on TikTok, some people just quitting their jobs when they were treated poorly or being disrespected by management. They would just be like, you know what, like, I'm quitting, goodbye, I'm not coming in today. And I do wish that the sentiment would transform from quitting a job to organizing a job. And I know that's not necessarily realistic in every job, but like, workers have become so much more aware of their working conditions, especially people who worked pre-pandemic, going into the pandemic, and then now, like, we're not obviously out of the pandemic, but the world is claiming we're post-pandemic. And they've seen how labor relations change and how they are being treated and how they aren't prioritized at all. And people are fed up with it, especially when they've put so much time or life into their job. And it's created this idea that, like, if they aren't going to prioritize me, like, we're going to prioritize each other. And people are organizing left and right. Because, like, a lot of people like their jobs. Just straight up. Like, not everyone likes their job, but a lot of people like their jobs and want to work these jobs and have investment in their communities, their jobs, their coworkers, their friends that they've created through these jobs, their customers, and know that, like, we could make this better. And instead of, like, a lot of people have gone from that sentiment of, I'm just going to quit, to, all right, then I'm taking it into my hands and we're taking it into our hands. And collectively organized in their stores. And we've seen it everywhere. We've seen it in Trader Joe's. We've seen it in Starbucks. We've seen it in Amazon. We've seen it in Target. We've seen it in Verizon Wireless, like retail. We've seen it, Big Lots there's the whole thing on Twitter right now with the Big Lots attempt to unionize. Like, it's everywhere. Need Pizza just filed, Chipotle. Like, it has spreaded everywhere. And, like, it's not through the, hard work of some senior organizer who's been organizing all their lives. It's the workers seeing that they can make things better for themselves and fighting to make things better for themselves. And yeah, there's guidance from, senior organizers and stuff like that. But a lot of it really is coming from the workers themselves pushing and pushing and pushing back against continuous exploitation.
Yeah. And, a lot of these are, again, like a lot of these are kids. These are people that are just entering the workforce. And they're being born into a world where they're seeing all of these like inequalities since day one. I think too, the fact that we've never been more connected through social media and like we've never been more connected than we are now through social media and like all of these other platforms, like that's leading us to be able to not only just like communicate with each other and organize with each other way easier, but we're able to see like the effects of like what's going on with these TikToks, with these strikes, with everything that's going on, everything that's captured. And that's like so inspiring, right? Like the things that like people were saying where they're saying, like the revolution won't be televised. Like now we're seeing this everywhere, and we are able to communicate and talk and share and like figure this out together. I don't know if this campaign wouldn't have been as successful if we weren't able to constantly be talking with people across the state and country as much as we are now. I think it's just like the perfect recipe for everything to unfold the way it is, to like have this beginning of like another labor movement like we are. And I really don't think that it's going to stop anytime soon.
No, absolutely not. And even to build on that too, I think one of the things that's also really driving it is like, I remember when I was entering the workforce, there was this sense of nihilism, like, oh, millennials entering the workforce, we have like the lowest share of monies in any generation. Being told like, you're the poorest generation, you guys are set up for the worst possible like economic outcomes for yourselves. Like you'll never own a house, you can't afford anything but to rent if you're lucky. And then it got worse, right? Gen Z comes into the workplace during the height of the climate crisis, being told like, oh, the world's going to end in a decade, you're all going to die. Graduating, seeing everything millennials went through with college not being a viable option in a lot of ways, and also seeing that even if you did go to college, that it didn't necessarily land you a good job or, lift you out of poverty. And all these options that have always been touted as like the way to make your life better became either inaccessible or a dead option. And then, like I said, climate crisis, right? Impending doom. What are Gen Z people entering the workforce supposed to feel other than like at the brink of despair, right? And I do think, despair does culturally have a stronghold sometimes, but then that stronghold breaks, right? Because people get sick of despair. People get sick of feeling hopeless. People get sick of feeling like they can't do anything and snap and do something. And I think that was also one of the biggest triggers for this spreading, right? Like, it didn't just spread from Buffalo for no reason, right? It may have started in Buffalo, but it's a nationwide movement with, 3% of stores across this country so far have filed, and that's the workers organizing themselves with limited resources. We've already won 225 stores in less than a year's time. Like, that is some unprecedented, unbelievable movement. That is some unique thing that isn't, brought on by organizers. It's brought on by people who know that the world needs to be better, or else we're just going to keep seeing it get worse. And I think that was a really big driving force for people, is that they knew this was how they could change the world for themselves and for everyone else, because this is how you hold companies accountable. This is how you make things better for the workers. This is how you take back profit from companies to lift people out of poverty. This is how you fight for a better life for everybody.
What did it feel like when your stores won that union vote? Like, what did that feel like?
Euphoric?
Well, let me just say, like, when we were getting ready for the vote, like, Tyler and I were in a room, like, we were over Zoom with, like, all of the lawyers and everything, just going over, like, the votes before they were going to be tallied. And, like, my stomach was making these, like, grotesque noises. Yeah, very unholy. Noises. Like, I was about to, like, turn into something. Like, I was about to begin a transformation. Like, it was, I was, like, sick to my stomach. I was like, oh, shit, like, what if we lose? Like, oh, my God, I'm going to be, like, so, like, I don't know. Like, it was just, like, the culmination of like these months of you and your coworkers going through something that's like pretty much unprecedented for any of your lives so far, and then like having to have that happen, like when me and my coworkers and Tyler's coworkers were in a room and like we were watching those votes happen, like when we both saw like respectively like our stores win, it was just euphoria. Literally is the best word for it. We were like jumping up and down, we were crying, like the photos of all of us are so ugly because we were just like red faced and beaming, and like it was like honestly one of the best days of my life. Just knowing
it is
that
now
you're
the second best day of my life.
Oh, what's the first day of your life?
Strike day.
Oh, that's a good one.
I just read about the strike at your store. It was earlier this month, right?
Yeah, it was so like 10 days ago.
How did that go? If it was the best day of your life, it sounds like it must have gone very well.
Yeah. I want to speak on the victory day really quick, and then I'll speak on that. But building off exactly what Josie was saying, like the week before that count, like I knew we had won. There was no doubt in my mind we had won. I had talked with everybody who had voted. I had been putting in sleepless nights talking with all of my coworkers. A lot of the responsibilities for organizing in my store ended up falling on me because of life commitments from my organizing committee, who then just couldn't dedicate that time or energy. And I really didn't have that time or energy, but I made it anyways. I don't know how. I still look back and I'm like, oh God. But like, I knew we were going to win. I had the hard numbers. I knew who voted. I knew who sent their ballots back in. I knew we were going to win. And it didn't matter that I had those hard numbers. Those last couple of days beforehand were nothing but this long anxiety attack where I was doing everything to keep myself afloat. That night before, I didn't sleep. I woke up on the verge of puking from anxiety and sleeplessness. I felt like crap that day, but we got our little coffees. We stopped by our little stores and we chugged along to the joint board office in LA to watch the votes be counted. And I'll never forget sitting there validating ballots for both of our stores and just seeing all the names come in and be like, I knew they voted. I knew they voted. I knew they voted, and just being like, okay, this person told me they voted yes. Like, they told me they voted yes. They told me they voted yes. And just like, still, it wasn't enough. I couldn't process it. I was freaking out. I was trying so hard to keep it together because Josie was also freaking out. And Josie had also had like a week-long panic attack. Josie, how many breakdowns did we walk each other through? Like,
yeah, it was like I got maybe a combined 7 hours of sleep that week, and also literally just like crying, like basically crying to Tyler, like in random phone calls where Tyler had to be like, Josie, calm the fuck down, nothing is happening. Like, I was just like, what if everybody lied to me? What if everybody actually wanted to vote no and everybody hates me? And we ended up just getting like a unanimous yes, and it's like, okay,
yeah,
like that's the mood.
We knew because we knew the number of ballots counted, we knew what our victory number was going to be. And, you know, my store went first, right? My store counted our ballots first. And when we were counting, it was just yes after yes. And when we hit that 13th ballot, I about threw up and passed out. We were jumping up and down, screaming, crying. We had a room full of, you know, union people, our coworkers, media. And it was just like this loud cheering where you couldn't even hear the votes continue to be counted over the Zoom call that we had over a TV because everyone was so busy cheering and screaming and crying. And, you know, it was a huge thing because my store was the third store. My store was the first to be counted in Southern California. And it was just this breaking point for everybody, this huge release. And we continued and we voted 24-1. And it was just so insane because that, aside from unanimous votes, that's still one of the biggest yes to no ratios that has happened in this campaign. And then Josie's store was next. And they needed 7 yes votes. And they hit that 7. And the same thing happened. It was just this even bigger sigh of relief and excitement and hype. And just like communal joy because all that work had finally paid off in the first 2 stores in Southern California to win one. And then the votes kept coming in. And then Josie's store finished unanimously. And I've just a third round of just this like insane freaking out, us all jumping up and down, hugging each other, like smacking each other on the back from excitement and just like tackling each other. I can't even describe how euphoric that day was. To this day, I still look back and I'm just like, oh my God. I don't even know how we gave like a press release speech after that. I felt like I was going to pass out.
We were like, this is how straight people think, like when their team win the Super Bowl or something. Like,
yeah.
Got to get that face paint on. Yeah, let's do it.
Exactly.
That sounds so good. That's you. It's history. Like it's you're living through historic moments, and you brought about historic moments. So yeah, Euphoria makes sense.
And
Do you
then
want to talk
Strike Day.
about Strike Day? Yeah, I'm like I have to. I was.
Oh.
I have to hear about Strike Day now. If it's the best day of your life.
Strike Day, I thought anxiety was perpetuated by getting to my vote count. Strike Day was so much because normally when you're planning a strike, you want to plan it way further in advance with more time to organize it. We organized a strike in my store in less than 3 days' time, which is like maybe a third of recommended time for planning a strike. The other store that had gone on strike had way more time to plan out their strike. They had about a week's time, which did them a lot better than us. And we still pulled it together. And in my store, like I told you, we have this proxy store manager in our store who has been doing right by a lot of us, right? And it's become glaring that the problems that we were fighting weren't just one person, that it was a systematic thing. And I just had in the back of my mind that people had lost interest in the union, had lost interest in fighting for, like, our contract. And so I was going into this with, like, this really deep worry that, like, I have to reactivate every single person in my store. Like, I don't know how I'm going to go about this in less than 3 days, nonetheless. And I was also working every single one of those days. I was working 8-hour shifts on those days where I was organizing a strike. So I'd have to get up at 4 a.m., 3:30 a.m. really, to go to my opening shifts at my store and work 8-hour shifts. And then I would still have to try to, like, talk to people to get the strike organized. And when you take a strike, you have to take a strike vote. And so I made it a point to talk to everyone in my store. And to my surprise, everyone was so on board. I had people who voted yes before I could even explain what we were striking over. And it was just, you know, like in those 3 days, a unanimous yes vote from everyone in my store, which was just unbelievable to me because I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be so much bigger of a battle. I was so exhausted, so worn out. And we also had to, like, build community support, right? And get people involved in the picket line. And, like, Lakewood is a really weird town in that we do have a lot of union workers there because, you know, the Long Beach ports. And so we have a lot of people who live in Lakewood because it's so close to the ports. But Lakewood's not particularly a progressive town. And it was very, very shocking how the strike turned out to me. I knew that on strike day, I would be there from open to close. I knew that that's what was going to happen because we needed a strike captain there. We needed someone to delete it, and I didn't have time to prepare people. There was no time. And so I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll take the responsibility on myself. Like, it's fine. We'll plan a better one next time. But for now, this is just what I'm going to have to do. So I took on that responsibility, and I was there at 4 a.m., and I was there until 9 p.m. And I cannot believe how many people stuck around as long as they did and how many supporters we had come out. We had so many different organizations come out. We had the president of the Los Angeles Labor Federation, Ron Herrera, come out. We had various different subcommittees from the LA Fed, like the People's Project, come out. We had baristas from non-unionized and non-organizing stores come out and support us. We had people from local companies come out and donate food and drinks to us. We had people bringing us sunblock. We had people just coming by, driving by and supporting us by cheering. And we were met with so little aggression. Like, there were definitely a couple of people who were really annoyed and mad at us and, like, whatever, boohoo to them. But, like, we had this massive outpour of support that I never could have seen coming. And I knew it was going to be a big deal because we were the first store to go on strike in Southern California. And we were a very highly publicized store because of being one of the first stores to not only file in California, but to win in California. And me and Josie have also, like, grew so many connections across Southern California with, you know, different organizations. And so when I got there at 4, I had a bunch of my coworkers there who are never up that early. And they were there, and I had a lot of coworkers work the strike for 10, 12 hours. We had people there from, 4 a.m. to 5 p.m. We had people there from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. We had so many different faces and so many people that I had never met who had no clue who we were. We had people from different unions from all across Southern California come out and support us. We had, the firefighters union. We had the flight attendants union. We had, like I said, the labor federation. We had longshore workers. We had communication workers. We had the machinist workers. Like, we had so many different unions just out there on the picket line with us. And it was so unbelievable to me because I had been so worried that my store had lost momentum. I really thought like it was going to be such an uphill battle just to make this happen. And everyone showed up. and then just like the outpour of love and support that came in through the strike fund. Workers United has a strike fund set up that reimburses 70% of lost wages, because Workers United knows, like, we are a lot of impoverished workers. And so, you know, in the knowledge that we need that money, I also worked with organizations to put together another strike fund to cover that other 30% that wasn't reimbursed. And I, in my mind of mine, was like, this will get like a little bit of money. It'll be enough to cover it. No, we got like over $2,500 in less than a 24-hour period. And that money went to all the workers who went on strike, and the rest of it's going to go to future strike funds for other stores across the state that go on strike and need that other 30% reimbursed. Like, I kid you not, this just moment that I can't believe. I remember at the beginning of organizing, people were like, are we going to have to go on strike? And everyone was so scared of it. People were so freaked out by the idea of it. And I was telling people, like, no, like, we won't have to go on strike unless we authorize it. Like, we get to take a vote on it. And so many people were comforted by that. And all those same people voted yes in a heartbeat to strike. And I was like, okay, let's go. Let's go.
That's just like the definition of solidarity, like to really see it in action. And then to also, you brought it about, solidarity embodied. Yeah, that obviously that sounds like a fantastic day and a really successful day. And like, we've talked a lot about the successes that you've both experienced with your stores. And even though there are still a lot of obstacles, and you're continuing to face obstacles and whatnot, what would you say to any worker that was considering starting or joining a union effort that's maybe feeling a little hesitant?
I say to do it, just do it. Like, this is like one of those things where it's like, it was daunting to think about when we started, just because, you know, I think a lot of us today don't grow up with the experiences and the context of unions other than just what we're learning, like, historically in school and, like, you know, the early 1900s and all of that. But we don't see but the effects of like that today. And now that this labor movement has started, and we've seen so many stories from so many different places, like from Starbucks, from Amazon, from Trader Joe's, from all of these kinds of places, like, it's so inspiring. And like, it kind of goes to show you too that this is one of those things that is so universally supported. Like, yeah, there are people that will fight tooth and nail against unions, but a lot of the time it's because they have something to lose as like a head of a corporation or somebody that, you know, isn't fighting for a living wage. If Tyler's strike is anything, like, can prove anything, it's that people that are driving down the street are going to stop and show support for something like this, because they know that this is the little guy fighting the man, and so many people can get behind that, no matter where your political ideology is. Yeah, I think that it's a little bit daunting to think about, you know, organizing your workplace, but at the end of the day, there's so many people that have done it in just the last year, and we're all in this together, and there has never been more support and more of like movement towards this than there has been today.
Yep. And what I have to say on that is basically, like, you don't have to hate your workplace or be unhappy in your workplace to unionize. You can love your job and think it's the greatest job ever and want to unionize to not only like ensure that forever, but also continuously make things better and give power to the workers to make those decisions. Unionizing isn't about making a bad workplace better. It's about improving conditions continuously forever and giving power to the workers. That looks like whatever it needs to look like per workplace, right? Anyone can unionize, and frankly, everyone should.
I'm fired up now. I have one last question. It's a little more silly than the rest of the questions we've already talked about. We are a cult podcast.
Love silly questions.
So we talk about cults a lot, and something that's always, ever since Starbucks started franchising, there's always been there's headline after headline after headline going back 20 whatever years. Is Starbucks a cult? There's the logo. There's the fact that they call their, the employees partners. There's the people that go there are so dedicated, they'll buy 18 lattes a day, blah, blah, blah. And now that there's this, the unionizing effort, and we've seen really a lot of tactics coming out of corporate. Like, if I asked the question, is Starbucks a cult? What would you say?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unabashedly. Okay, wait, can I elaborate though?
Please,
I got
yes.
hired on in Washington State.
I was hired on in Olympia, Washington, which is, just south of where the company comes from, right? And when I say, that I think this company is a cult, this is something I've thought since I was hired on. Like, no joke. I have always been like, oh my God, that's the Howard. Yes. like when I got hired on and I was being taught about the company, my store manager made a very, very, very strong point of like talking about the history of the company and how benevolent of a leader Howard Schultz is.
Uh-oh.
And I was like, okay, red flag. I was like, what is this? But like, I remember like they took us to the Seattle Roastery as a store field trip to meet Howard Schultz. And then like we all got a copy of his autobiography and were asked to read it and talk about it with each other. And like, I've always been like, okay. And then just like this loyalty that we've been asked to have to the company, it is cult-like. And I've been saying this my entire career with the company that like, yes, this company absolutely like, is it is. It's just like, yes. There is a cult-like mentality around our, you know, now again CEO and the company and the culture of the company. And like, it shows if you meet workers who have been with the company for a long time, they all say the same talking points about how great this company is. And like, they will say these things and you're like, this is cult-like, like this is demonic. Something is not right.
Yeah. An anecdote is that my sister is 13 years older than me. And when I was really little, she was actually a supervisor of a Starbucks. And back then, it was extremely common for everybody to call Howard Schultz Howie and refer to him as like
Uncle Howie.
No,
or Uncle Howie.
No.
Yes.
Oh
yes.
boy.
Uncle Howie.
Yeah. They'd call him Uncle Howie, and they would like be like, oh yeah, like, you know, Uncle Howie's getting us this new product for like summer, like that kind of discussion. And even when I was hired in the company, you know, Howard Schultz has a few books, but one of them is called like Onward, and we would have like a stack of them in the back room at our job, and there'd be a little thing there, like there's a little note that was like for you to read on your breaks, and it was like, okay. And there has been this weird like cult ideology towards specifically Howard Schultz for so long. And it's definitely not a mistake that when the unionizing efforts happened, like they first started, they kicked the old CEO out and brought Howard Schultz back in. Because a lot of the people that have been with the company for a long time, especially store managers, were like, oh yes, like our Uncle Howie's back. Like the company's gonna be great again.
I literally witnessed a district manager have like a tearful breakdown of excitement.
No.
Yes.
This is way worse than I thought. I thought this was going to be a like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, people drink their lattes.
No.
No, it's terrifying. It is akin to religious indoctrination in a lot of ways. Like, it very much feels like I'm being brought in to like this group of people who all like share this like thoughts about some benevolent leader and how great, you know, he is and how infallible he is. My old store manager, when Howard came back, he did this really terrible keynote speech. It was goofy, it was nonsensical, it was frankly stupid. And one of the things he talked about were these cold foam hand blenders. And my store manager made all of us sit down and watch this video. It was an hour long, and she sat with every single one of us to watch it. And she was like, isn't he so amazing? Like, look at this is going to save you so much so much stress, like so much exhaustion. Like, look how amazing he is that he's thinking about you from all the way up there in Seattle. And I literally just had to be like, girl, you're a year older than me. You are a year older than me. Why is this what you're thinking? Do you have you not seen true crime podcasts? Do you not pay attention to these? Are the flags not flagging?
Those blenders are like $5 on Amazon. Like, they're not anything new.
They're ugly.
Exciting. Yeah, exactly. But
they
Uncle
look
Howie
like a fake
them.
wine glass.
Man, it's this season especially, and it's like come up since we started doing the show. Just like it's a running joke on the show of like eventually like we're just zeroing in on the thesis of capitalism is a cult, and it just keeps coming up over and over and over again. Like this season especially, like we did a whole episode about like corporate culture is cult like, and having little nicknames like Uncle Howie, like that's on there. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that employees of Starbucks are referred to as partners? Does that feel empowering? Does that feel like inclusive, or does it feel like a weird jargon that's cult-like?
Oh my God.
It is intentionally built to make you feel like a special thing inside this company when we are literally the ground level employees, and to the company we're super disposable. But they don't want us to think that they think that. There's a sense of euphoria that they're trying to build in people, and a sense of attachment and identity that they're trying to build within people. Like, why would I feel that working at Starbucks is a piece of my identity? Like, maybe I did and I will say, once upon a time, I did, right? When I was, like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, just learning about, like, how capitalism was destroying everything. Like, I definitely had the sense where I was like, oh my god, Starbucks is so great for, their workers and, like, the environment. Girl, no.
And that's that's especially what I mean about, like, how it's so perplexing to me how they've gotten away with this branding for so long. Like, because when I came to the company, too, like, I felt like I was lucky to get a job at Starbucks. Like, I was like, oh my god, like, I'm finally getting hired at this cool
They
place.
chose me.
Yes, I'm finally, like, going to be around people that are just, like, so cool and so chill and get to make coffee all day and, like, this is, like, nothing. And then you, like, work there for a little while and then you learn about Howard Schultz's book, Onward, and then for Pride Month, they're like, hey, happy Pride, fellow queer person. We got you a shirt that says Onward on it, but it's in rainbow font. Like, what's happening?
This is a cult.
This is a cult.
This is a cult. Wow. And it's goes back to that systemic issue of just all the companies do this. Like, they all have little names for their employees, and I feel like we could talk about that for a million years. And
it's so funny watching. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thank you for the insight on the cult thing, because I was like, oh yeah, ha ha ha. There's cult like atmosphere. No, it's real.
We belong to a cult. But it's not the cool cult. There's a cooler cult that we belong to, and it's the cult of our queen, Charlie XCX. And I recommend joining the cult of Charlie XCX, just as a heads up to everybody. Stream crash.
That is the cult that we're a part of, and we're going to spread through every media request you ever have.
You know what? We've concluded on this show that there are some benevolent cults, and it sounds like that's one of them.
Yes, absolutely. It's so interesting, like, seeing the Starbucks model of, cult-like mentality towards the company being adopted. Because I don't know if anyone else is, like, keyed in on this, but, like, right before the pandemic, Taco Bell had, like, a massive branding change where they started trying to, like, reinvigorate the brand. And, like, they completely, like, refaced their company to be this, like, almost like gentrify-y looking spot where it's got, like, grays and purples as the main colors, and it's all, like, a super, like, simple, And during the pandemic is when I really saw it kick off. I was like, now hold up, wait, what? Where they had messaging that was so similar to Starbucks externally, and they were making such a proud point about how great they were towards their workers and all the benefits they had, and, like, how, the workplace had transformed. And, like, I don't know if it was just, like, maybe, like, a regional thing, but I saw that happen, and I was like, okay, Starbucks too, I see you.
Yeah, like, I think that's, like, a thing that a lot of companies are trying to chase. Like, they're trying to kind of, like, follow that Starbucks standard of, like, being like, hey, everybody, we treat our workers the best. And also, if you work here, you're going to get treated like, this is not a fast food job, when it really is. And they also use that branding and that reputation to take more advantage of you, because you think that because you're a part of a good company, nothing bad can happen.
So if you work for a company that's changing its branding to look like the stores are all gray, gentrified, and it's stealing Starbucks corporate lingo, just go ahead and start the unionizing process, or run, or that. Send one of those texts that's going to show up on r/anti-work, and then run. Is there anything you feel like we haven't covered today that you'd like to mention or like to talk about, or did we hit it all?
I think we hit it all because we talked about Charlie XCX.
I mean, we could talk more about Charlie XCX, honestly. I thought that was going to be hour 2, but...
We can, we'll have to reschedule something else. When we do the Charlie XCX episode, I need to go stream some music, get involved in the cult, and then...
Hey, listen, if you ever have an episode on, like cults within the pop community, we're your 2 people for that.
I mean, that's really good to know, because we have talked about doing that. So that is really good to know. We might be circling back at some point.
I love that.
Thank you so much for sitting down to talk with me. And thank you for the work that y'all are doing. It is the important work. It is the work that I think you're right, that the labor movement is, like, revitalized in America right now. So I'm just glad we got to have this conversation.
This has been fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
This was great.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions.
Shoot.
The first question, the most important one, and I'm just going to lay bare my cultural illiteracy here. What's Charlie XCX?
Charlie XCX is one of the top pop stars of the last half decade.
What?
Maybe longer.
Really?
Charlie XCX. Okay, do you remember when
I know Little Nas X.
Do you remember when Iggy Azalea entered the mainstream?
Yeah.
With, I'm so fancy. That was with Charlie XCX. Charlie XCX also does that. I crashed my car into a bridge.
Oh.
That's Charlie XCX.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, how come I didn't know that till just now?
I don't know.
Why do I not know things?
Who knows anything?
I feel so ignorant.
Same. All the time. Mostly what I feel most ignorant about is the fact that people who work at Starbucks are encouraged to call Howard Schultz Uncle Howie.
Uncle Howie. I think that's cute. You don't think that's cute?
I don't.
Second question is, are they doing PSL? Because I got a hankering for PSL while we were talking there. I really kind of want to go to a Starbucks now and get like a Frappuccino.
I think it is PSL
it's
time.
PSL season, right?
I think it is PSL season currently.
And if you're a PSL hater, you can just stop listening.
Just get
out of here.
I don't even want to talk about it, honestly. Yes, oh my God, okay. So
I guess we should probably talk about the interview.
Let's talk about the interview. I guess you had some questions while we were sitting and listening that I realized, we should probably explain some of these things to our listeners. Do you remember what
context for me, context for listeners?
I wrote down your questions, but do you want to ask them? Do you want me to ask you your questions back?
I think I know. So the thing that I was curious about right off the bat was Buffalo. So you guys kept referencing Buffalo, the Buffalo store. Right. There was a win of some kind there. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on what happened there, what was considered a win.
So the way that Starbucks unionization works, when a store decides to unionize, a vote must take place.
Okay.
And, you have to get a majority of yay votes and then you're a unionized store. So Buffalo was the first Starbucks retail store to unionize. They unionized under the collective of Workers United. So Workers United is a really big union. I think it's largely textile workers and laundry workers. They're a very big union that's affiliated with the SEIU, I think, a very big union umbrella.
Okay.
So when the Buffalo store won their union vote, they became a unionized store under Workers United. So Starbucks Workers United is the organizing collective to get Starbucks stores unionized under this Workers United umbrella.
Okay, and when Josie and Tyler's stores unionized, is that under the same umbrella?
Yes, it's all under Workers United.
I see. Okay, so there's each individual store has to do a vote, but once they do, they become part of this
and there's still
thingy.
There are steps that must be taken after a union vote is taken. So for example, that's when contract bargaining and contract negotiations have to take place, where the union workers meet with management or corporate and kind of start hashing these demands, quote unquote, out. That's when the contracts will get negotiated. And that's its own whole thing. So winning your union vote is a huge step, and there are steps that will follow, but it's that really big, kind of first push of the boulder down the hill.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it sounded like the Buffalo thing was a big deal, and I get it now because, I guess it's like you're saying, it's that initial push of the boulder. And now there's some momentum. I guess that makes sense. There was probably a lot of pushback on that initial.
There was. I just Googled this.
Tap.
I Googled this and learned recently that, and by recently I mean while we were listening to the interview.
That's very recent.
There have been scattered efforts to unionize various aspects of Starbucks since 1985.
Whoa, that's right after it was founded.
Yeah, so warehouse workers and I think coffee source stuff, there's been various efforts. I think there was a push in the 2000s for the mid 2000s for the retail stores that kind of fizzled.
And it never caught on.
And this has been the first big huge wildfire of unionizing efforts.
I think that speaks a little bit to what you guys were talking about with the larger sort of is this a new dawn of labor movement in America? It does kind of seem like that, and it kind of seems this is maybe why there's been more success. There's more broad-based, I mean, I was going to say broad-based support, but also broad-based experiential stuff that's just pushing people to this, right? That's one of the things that they were talking about is the people are having these experiences that are garbage. Right. And I that was a big takeaway for me too. It wasn't just about the pay. It was also about the the treatment in the stores and the quality and conditions of their working. And that was a big goal for unionizing is not just getting that living wage being able to be paid to them, but also improving the overall conditions for all the workers and everybody that works there. So anyway, it makes sense that, over the past 20, 30 years since those other events, those other unionization events that fizzled, things have kind of gotten worse, particularly if you are sort of in that working class bracket. Then it's not just the more widespread support for this type of thing. It's also just like everybody's fucking experiencing that, and like the dam has broken.
It's, I think, that two-pronged kind of effect of the shitty state of labor right now. Like, you graduate college or you graduate high school into circumstances where, you can't get ahead by any stretch of the imagination financially. Like, you cannot build up a life.
Right.
Paired with the bad working conditions, paired with everything that COVID brought. And also, I think a point that Josie and Tyler really brought up was how much more connected we are. You can have this groundswell movement across the country because of social media. And we talked about TikTok. Like, TikTok was referenced multiple times. I follow Starbucks Workers United on TikTok. Like, they have these they have these social media presences that make sure that not only the partners or the workers at the Starbucks stores are connected with each other, but also the UNIs of the world are aware of what is going on with the unionizing efforts. And I think helps that groundswell, helps that kind of avalanche effect.
Yeah, that reminds me too of the sort of the double edge of that sword, though, which is like the story they told about some of the tactics used by Starbucks of like, man, those smelled familiar. Like the whole just put the information out there and it's out there and the retraction gets missed, but the headline is out there.
Right.
Like that. Oh my God. I've seen that a million times with like misinformation and disinformation. And it's just interesting that these large corporate entities are well aware of like the information media literacy atmosphere and landscape that they have to play with. And they're like, oh, here's a tool we could use. Okay. But I do think it kind of goes back to, I think maybe what is helping immunize people, though, against that kind of stuff is it goes back to this like universal experience. I think that if enough people are having this experience of this like shitty, no hope, no future work experience, and if everybody's experiencing that, and then you see this like attempt at misinformation from a corporate entity,
right,
you're a little less likely to be like, maybe they're right. And you're going to be like, I'm actually going to dismiss that because of the source. And
then when all of the news stories comes out about like the NLRB fining Starbucks for its union busting, like that helps paint them as the villains in this story.
Right. But like 10 years ago, that story might have like caught fire, right? Like 10 years ago, that might have been like oh shit, I can't believe these dastardly people are colluding with this dastardly NLRB.
Right.
But today it's like, wait a minute. No, I don't think so. Because like everybody has this experience of this, like, I work for this company and
I think
it fucking
what
sucks.
You're saying is that the hot coffee fiasco of the 90s with McDonald's probably would happen differently today. Is that maybe what you're saying? That maybe that corporate propaganda would maybe have a little less of a foothold?
Everybody go watch Hot Coffee. Yeah. Is this just a coffee themed episode? Is that why you brought that up?
I know there's at one point I think Josie said like something is brewing, and I didn't catch that's such a good joke until we were listening to the interview.
The unions are brewing. The short thing on the hot coffee thing is basically like McDonald's was actually negligent, and there was just the whole oh, somebody sued them for their hot coffee being hot is like absolutely not what really happened. You should totally go watch the documentary or look it up. It's really fascinating.
But be prepared if you see any photos of the burns because
they're not good.
It will scar you.
I didn't mean to laugh at that.
It will scar you mentally.
As it scarred
that poor woman. Yeah. Did you have any other takeaways? If not, I have my big takeaway that I'd love to share.
I do. I mentioned this to you when we were listening. Like, I don't really fully grasp why. I mean, like, I do and I don't grasp why corporations are so aggressively anti-union. Mm-hmm. Especially corporations like Starbucks, where it's like, we're woke and we have free trade, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I don't think there's like a great pithy answer. I do think that maybe it has something to do though with the fact that like a lot of this stuff that we consider them to be quote unquote, I hate to keep using the fucking W word here, but that we consider them to be woke for.
You can say progressive. You can say
performatively progressive or whatever you want to say. Is more of a marketing stunt, right? Sure. Like especially the free trade coffee thing, because they had like Starbucks.
Are they free trade?
No,
fair trade?
they were fair trade. I forget what
trade?
the exact trade title thingy was, but they were like
fair trade coffee.
Fair trade coffee guy. Like they had the label from like the organization, and then they're like, actually, we're gonna do our own thing, and so now they have like their own like in-house like Starbucks. What? Like, yeah, they have their own like in-house Starbucks like fair trade stamp. And so it's like Starbucks is going to Starbucks' own suppliers and saying, yep, looks like Starbucks is doing a good job here. A+, they get the stamp. We give ourselves a stamp. Like that's literally what they do with the fair trade thing.
Okay. That's a move.
Anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, though, is like...
You're saying this company wants to like reap the branding benefits of the progressivism without actually having to put their money where its mouth is?
Right, and so therefore, I guess it's like they just haven't figured out how to reap branding benefits from unionization.
Because I think unionization, maybe like I would absolutely go to the unionized coffee place over the non-unionized coffee place. And they would get my dollars in that way, but it would make Howard Schultz less of a billionaire. Like it would make what the previous CEO not able to take that, multi-million-dollar pay raise. Like, yes, you'd get the benefit of quote unquote WOKE points, but it also would have a real material effect on the wealth hoarding.
I think that's what it is. I think it's like ultimately it's that a union is actually going to cost them, right? Like the fair trade thing doesn't cost them because they do their own thing. Right. And then they send a guy down there that's like, yep, looks like we're doing a great job.
Right.
The reason they do that is because it's probably way cheaper than doing the actual fair trade stamp thing. Right. And so they can't get away with that.
It's like getting rid of the straws without getting rid of the plastic cups.
Exactly. So I think that's ultimately what it is. It's like this is unavoidably costly to them.
Right.
And like that's where they draw the line is actually sharing profit. Like everything else is fine. They'll throw $1 million here or there at stuff that they can like blast out on their marketing channels. But when it comes to like actually sharing profits with their own lower level employees,
with the people making the coffees, drinks, and putting them into the hands of the customers, like the fundamental cornerstone of the business. I'm making violent gestures right now.
You can hear her shaking back and forth. I'll also say that, like, I know that we rag on capitalism a lot, and there's the like you said, the through line of is capitalism a cult? I'm still a little bit on the fence about like the value of capitalism myself personally as our like, resident privileged straight white dude. But I'll say this, like these guys are saving capitalism from itself. Like if it's going to be saved, they're the ones saving it from itself because like it has like the capital class has no qualms about like eating up all of their resources until there's nothing left and then like eating their own tails until it's dead. Yeah. So they're the ones that are like arresting that process and like allowing for some sort of like balance in a system that would otherwise just burn itself up.
Right.
So, even if you are like pro-capitalist, rah-rah, like, and this is coming from somebody with an economics background, like the unionization movement right now and folks like Josie and Tyler are like, if anything, they will save it from itself.
Right. Your stance on unions doesn't have to necessarily dictate your stance on economic policy overall.
Right.
Like you can be pro-union and maybe still think that capitalism has some redeeming qualities.
And did you know Starbucks isn't actually Starbucks?
What does that mean?
It's like so.
What does that mean? Don't say that. What does that mean?
I read.
Is it like how Facebook is meta?
It wasn't Onward. It was some other book that Uncle Howie wrote. What was it? It was like One Drink at a Time. I don't know. It was the book he wrote in the 90s. One Cup at a Time. Something like that.
I remember that you read the Howard Schultz book.
Yeah, but it was like his. It wasn't an autobiography. It was like, here's how I built Starbucks.
Yeah, because I remember you were the one who told me that it was like based on Italian coffee shops.
Yeah. So the deal was he worked for this company called Starbucks, which was a...
What?
Yes. Yeah,
Wait.
so he didn't found it. This is... So you know how like...
He Tesla'd? He
Yes.
McDonald's?
Yes, he Tesla'd and McDonald's. Like I was just going to say, like all of these guys... like
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he worked for a company called... They were roasters in Seattle called Starbucks. And he was like their marketing guy or something. And then like he left for God, I don't remember why he left now, but he went to like visit Italy and he was like, man, these Italians, they know how to do coffee shops. This is pretty cool. What a cool vibe. I'm going to bring this back to America. So he went back to Seattle and it was like, he named his coffee shops. He founded a couple coffee shops. He named it something Italian. It was like Il Giorno or something like that.
Il Cafe.
Il Cafe. And they ended up like doing pretty well because it was like a good idea to bring that style of like coffee shop to the United States. It was like not something we really had here yet, which is crazy to imagine right now because we're in like third or fourth wave coffee. But that was like new to the US at the time. So it did pretty well to the point where he was like, oh, I have enough money to actually go back and buy Starbucks. So he went back and bought Starbucks and then rebranded his Il Cafe, whatever he called he renamed them all to Starbucks. And then that's actually Starbucks. And then they just spread from there.
I'm shaking.
So it's like he started another company that ate Starbucks and then like wore its jacket.
Wore its flesh. Wore its skin as a suit.
Yeah. Flesh suit. Corporate flesh suit.
I don't even know what I was going to say next.
Cult. You're going to say cult.
Oh my God. Well, okay. Thank you for sharing that. That's a very good insight. I did also, while we're talking about the ruthlessness of corporations and the flensing and slaying and skinning.
Flensing, callback.
I just also wanted to, while I was doing this interview and doing the research for this episode and talking about it with you, it really did make me think back to the takeaway from our previous episode about about Black Oxygen Organics, and how in that episode we were talking about the reality that small actions can have big results. Like the little guy can band together to take on the big guy. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this episode too. Like these in the face of the like corporate behemoth that Starbucks is, these individual stores unionizing are quote unquote small efforts, and they're having a huge impact on the corporation, on our society, on media, on culture. Like it's I'm glad that we did those episodes back to back and kind of showed those that our actions can and do have an effect.
Yeah, I got big vibes about that when Josie and Tyler were talking, especially about how they were talking about the reaction to, or how close they were following Buffalo.
Right.
I was like, oh man, like this one store, this one small store in this one small city, thousands of, like on the opposite end of the country, and it's having this like outsized impact on like how many people are like paying attention to it and inspired by it, and like just demonstrating that something is actually possible.
Right.
So it definitely gave me that sense of the like, the small seed can actually end up having that large because of all those feedback effects, right?
Right.
Yes.
So we did answer it in the interview, but we didn't go through the criteria. So
yeah, we got to do the criteria.
We've got to go through the criteria to answer the question, is Starbucks a cult?
So charismatic leader is like for sure
Uncle Howie. I was
Howie.
not expecting that.
And he's got like 2 or 3 books.
He's got multiple books. They're hanging out in the storerooms. You're supposed to read it. You have to watch his keynotes. Everyone's being like, "Oh my God, Uncle Howie! He's such a charismatic leader."
I mean, I got the vibe of cult of personality from that guy way back before, like
I didn't know
time
anything
ago.
about Howard Schultz until he tried to run for president and it didn't work.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
He tried to run for president and then he went back to being Starbucks CEO.
Yeah, no, he's always been like a name CEO. Like he's always been sort of like famous within the business communities. He has the books that he's written.
Right.
I recall from the book that he did write, it was very like,
my name's Uncle Howie.
I don't know if I thought about it in these words at the time, but it was definitely like, I'm going to write some myth making about myself. Like it was definitely like that
the
sort of thing.
The story of how I wandered around Italy until
exactly.
inspiration just struck.
Right. And then I went back to the motherland and I brought Starbucks back into the fold, but it was really me. So that's high.
Expected harm. And we're basically talking about the perspective of like the Tylers and Josies of the world, like the baristas.
Me, like when I have like a venti,
and then you're all huffed up, and your heart rate is really high. Then I try to get my blood pressure taken, and they're like, "Why is it 190?" And I'm like,
"Why is it 3 a.m. and I can't sleep?" Oh, right, it's because I had Starbucks after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Oops.
I think the expected harm is pretty high here. Like the stories that Tyler and Josie were telling us, like not just about, you know, being unable to afford tires for your car, which like nobody should be unable to afford tires for their car, particularly if you're working at a job. Mm-hmm. And then also like the literal like violent abuse from customers, from coworkers,
that was pretty wild.
To have that experience. And they made it clear that those experiences were not like unique to their working lives at Starbucks, like that this was something endemic.
Right. Yeah, I'd say high. I mean, I do want to give Starbucks like some credit for like the fact that they actually do, you know, do healthcare and stuff like that. But then to like dangle that, like it's just, it really comes back down to like how they've behaved vis-a-vis the unionization, right? Like prior to learning about all of that, I would have said like, you know, Starbucks is probably a pretty good place to work and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've never worked there, but that's the impression I had.
Sure.
But the impression I've gotten over the last several years has like really sort of changed my perception of them as a company. And like, it's some of these tactics, right? It's like taking the healthcare and saying like, well, you know,
just because
if you unionize, we might take it from you.
Yeah, that's really dastardly. And like, just because it's better than some other places doesn't mean it's not harming you still. Like if you have, you know, potential, not even the promise of, if you have the potential to access healthcare, or the potential to health insurance, the potential to access health insurance, the potential to access, you know, aid with schooling, but you still can't even make enough money to pay your rent or to buy tires for your car. Right. Like that is still a net harm.
If you can't live in the place that you need to live to work at the place that you're working.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, and then like the information warfare stuff is like, that's really pernicious. So
not a fan.
Yeah, I'm gonna say probably high on this one. Maybe not like 100%, but in the 90s, the high 90s.
What do you think about Ritual? Don't forget that they call all of their Starbucks employees partners. Yeah. They have a logo.
The logo is big for them, actually.
The logo is big. The logo, the coloring, the
logo, their logo, that's not just us. I mean, like their logo is popular fodder for conspiracy theorists since, you know, internet immemorial.
What about the fact that like they have specific, you know, they were calling them tall, grande, and venti.
Oh, I was going to bring up,
big, medium, and small, or whatever.
Yeah, because they're fancy. They're fancy Italian.
Get your cappuccino. Is that Ritual?
Absolutely. Is it ritual for the employees, though?
It's ritual for your manager to sit you down and make you watch Uncle Howie's keynote speech and then make you read the book.
Yeah, I don't
and
think
then give you an Onward shirt.
Right. I don't think the drink names count as ritual for employees. I think that's ritual for customers.
I think it's overall ritual.
You think so?
I don't know. I mean,
it's definitely there.
I think that there's presence of ritual for sure.
For sure.
We already answered this one. Is it niche within society?
No. So it's a religion. That's so at this point that changes it from cult or just weird to religion or just weird.
I feel uncomfortable saying
the best they can do is religion.
That workers are in a religion. I also feel uncomfortable saying that workers are in a cult. But I guess that's what we do on this podcast, is make unilateral judgment calls about circumstances that we are personally not invested in.
That's right. Like the good white people podcasters that we are.
Anti-factuality. If you are
the
specifically
information warfare
leveraging disinformation, is that anti-factuality?
And it also seems like the weird not weird tactics, like the
to say we don't know if
tactics.
The union will keep this. We don't know if the union will keep that. That's pretty...
Well, and the, like, turning workers against each other, like the whole tactic that I think it was Tyler talking about this, where they would take, like, a particularly charismatic person that works, a partner.
Sure.
And, like, inject them with their, like, anti-union agenda to try to, like, disperse that. I mean, like... Machiavelli would be proud of that. I don't know if it makes it
Uncle Maki.
I don't know if that's anti-factual though. Certainly the information warfare is. Yeah, I mean like the lying is for sure.
It's present.
Yeah, it's present. I'd say like 78.2%.
Percentage of life consumed. Seems pretty high for these workers. I mean, Tyler was specifically talking
Tyler was like,
about,
I'm waking up at 4 a.m.
Yeah, and working, 8-hour shifts 5 days a week or 7 days a week, or like in the pandemic, there was, so much turnover, and like it's and outside of shifts, they were also talking about like how many workers will end up with Starbucks being a huge part of their identity. Yeah, even outside of this.
Yeah, it seems pretty high in the life consumption. It was pretty gnarly when he was talking about the shift stuff too, where I was just like, God, that sucks that people are forced to need to like arrange their schedules to make enough money to live. Like, couldn't we just pay them more? And that's what this is all about. But it's just like,
God, when Tyler said when Tyler estimated that their location was making $50,000 to $60,000 a week, and that nobody at that store was making that in a year, oof, I
wonder what their cost of goods is. Probably not that much.
I don't know. Dogmatic beliefs.
We're right. Everybody else is wrong. I didn't really get a huge sense of that. I mean, they were definitely playing the like, we're right, the unionizers are wrong card.
But I didn't get the sense of like, we are the ones who cure. We're the only place to work or any of that, really.
Yeah, I'd say that's fairly low.
Chain of victims.
They don't feel recruity in that way.
I don't know. I think that the projecting the image of like, this is a place for cool gays to work is like a little like to portray the company as like a place specifically for gay people, for queer people, for trans people to like come and work does feel recruity in a way, to the point where it's like it is a running joke or a running theme in queer circles that like people are going to go work at Starbucks. Like, people...
Do you get the impression that then because this is chain of victims, right? Like, so do you get the impression that sense then gets passed on from like one person to another? Like, hey, you should come work at Starbucks. Like, it's really friendly.
It seems like if that exists, that chain is now being broken by like the Tylers and the Josies of the world who are speaking up about the realities. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of say I don't know. Yeah.
This is an uncertain criterion.
Safe or unsafe exit?
I'm actually going to go with unsafe exit on this one.
I think I am too.
Because, and I'm doing like a little bit of a flex with the rule here, but like, I think that even if you're not literally exiting, like leaving the company, I think the unsafe part here is what these union organizers are facing, right? Like, it's unsafe for them to exit the cult-like part of the company into this version of Starbucks that's more friendly to the workers, right, and actually respects them as a block of power. Transitioning from not having that to having that seems unsafe. That seems like something that the company is aggressively attacking. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that is my quote unquote exit, and that is what's unsafe.
I'll see that, and I'll add, Tyler and Josie specifically talked about how Starbucks creates an environment in which you like can't leave because you're paid so low. You cannot build any sort of like nest egg or safety net to be able to leave. So leaving Starbucks, like they said, the people who quit or people who had like families to rely on or somehow had money. Leaving Starbucks means you might be homeless. You might lose your car. You might not be able to get another job. You might go into debt. Like
Can't buy groceries.
That's an unsafe exit if I ever heard one.
Yeah, and that's certainly not unique to Starbucks, but it doesn't mean that it's not true for them.
Right.
So, I'd say unsafe exit is high.
What do we think? Is Starbucks a cult?
So we had a few that it scored low. I think we had two? One that was low and one that was uncertain, and then the rest were pretty high. I think that is a yes, but it's yes to religion. And also I think that like the expected harm.
I'm not calling it a religion.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not
Starbucks
doing
absolutely
it. I think I disagree
Bro,
with
we
you.
called Zumba a religion. Obviously Starbucks is more religious than Zumba. They have like cult symbols and shit. Uncle Howie.
Going to follow the lead of
the Father, the Son, and the Holy Cup of Coffee.
I'm going to follow the lead of the folks that we interviewed today, and they said cult, so I didn't give them the option of religion.
Whoa, hold on. That was a biased survey, Kayla.
I'm saying cult.
I'm saying religion, so it's a split decision here.
It's a split decision, hungry.
Frankly, I'm inclined to go back and ask Josie and Tyler and present them with this new information
and
get a complete picture of what's going on.
Well, we did talk about bringing them back, so
yeah,
maybe we'll have to
talk
that.
About Lil Nas X, Charlie X.
Charlie XCX.
Charlie XCX, that's right. I know things.
Thank you again to Tyler and Josie for chatting with me about all of this stuff. I learned a lot. I had no idea what was going on behind these like unionizing efforts, and I had no idea that Uncle Howie was a thing.
That's right. I didn't know Uncle Howie was a thing either, even though I had read a book by Uncle Howie. So thank you for that. Thank you, and also thank you for what you're doing. It is indeed the Lord's work, as we say.
We will be sure to link in the show notes and on our social media any pertinent resources. So we'll get you all connected with Starbucks Workers United, their website, their social media, follow them on Twitter, on TikTok. I'm sure they have an Instagram. But there is specifically a website that you can go to. It even has like a pledge that you can sign to stand with Starbucks stores if and when they need you, like for these strike actions or maybe potential boycotts or other things that are down the road. So check out our show notes for all of that information.
All right, I'm going to go get me a PSL.
Let's go.
Yeah.
This is Kayla.
This is Chris.
And this has been...
Cult or Just...
Coffee. Uncle Howie.